Welcome everyone to today's GGU Presents. Michael Beasley, take it away, Director of Communications at GGU.
Thanks so much, Priscilla. I want to welcome everybody to what I think is going to be a really interesting show, Rebellious Lawyering in Immigrant Communities During COVID-19. As Priscilla said, I'm the Director of Communications at GGU, and we are so fortunate to have such a knowledgeable panel to discuss this important topic. I'm going to do some quick introductions and then turn it over to Monica, who's our moderator today. Speaking of Monica, she's an adjunct professor here at GGU and also a supervising attorney for the immigrant rights team at Centro de la Raza in Oakland. She's also the founder and co-executive director of the Dreamer Fund in San Francisco, which is a nonprofit that focuses on education equity for the undocumented community. Her experience focuses on asylum, deportation defense, and family-based immigration. She's also from Los Angeles, which we won't hold against her, born to immigrant parents from Mexico and a proud veteran of the Air Force. The guests, we have 4 guests today, starting with Bill Hing. He's a professor at the University of San Francisco and director of the Immigration and Deportation Defense Clinic. Throughout his career, he's pursued social justice through a combination of community work, litigation, and scholarship. He's the author of numerous academic and practice-oriented publications on immigration policy and race relations. And he's the founder of the Immigrant Legal Resource Center in San Francisco, which, by the way, if I have this correct, started back at GGU in the 1970s. So welcome, Bill. Aidin Castillo is directing attorney at Centro de la Raza in Oakland. Before that, she was an immigration policy attorney at the Immigrant Legal Resource Center also, where she provided technical assistance to congressional staff who were drafting immigration-related legislation, including legalization provisions and the collateral consequences of criminal convictions. She was also a fellow at the California Rural Legal Assistance Foundation. Welcome, Aidin. And Sabrina Farrell is an Alameda County Assistant District Attorney. She has prosecuted criminal felony cases, including jury trials of sexual assault, violent robberies, homicides, elder abuse, and human trafficking. In 2015, while in the juvenile division, she was the designated prosecutor in a specially designed Alameda County Girls Court, which aims to rehabilitate and steer young girls away from the criminal justice system. She's also the executive director of the Alameda County Family Justice Center, which is made up of dozens of agencies that provide services and support to victims of domestic violence, sexual assault and exploitation, child abuse, elder independent adult abuse, and stalking. Welcome, Sabrina. And Sylvie Carina is the director and co-founder of CALMA, which is the Collective Action for Laborers, Migrants, and Asylum Seekers. That's an all-volunteer immigrant services organization in the Bay Area. And if I'm not mistaken, that's relatively new as well. Her background is in grassroots community organizing around the intersection of climate and social justice. She has dedicated the last 2 years to being of service to the growing humanitarian aid crisis at the US-Mexico border and to immigrant families navigating the complexities and injustices of the US immigration system. Welcome, Sylvie. Welcome, everybody, for joining us today. We really appreciate you all taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here. We'll get started in a second. Last thing, though, if you are watching us, this is interactive. You have an opportunity to ask questions using the chat button at the bottom of the screen, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as possible. That's it. Okay, Monica, take it away.
Thank you so much, Michael and Priscilla also for putting this on and helping us kind of gather the panelists and get this type of dialogue going for GGU Presents. Really appreciate everyone's time, especially the panelists and the coordinators, but also the participants who are here today to dialogue with us and to join today's discussion. Today we'll be dialoguing about reframing how you think about lawyering and advocacy through the rebellious lawyering lens with the help of our wonderful panelists. And as you all might know, COVID-19 has endangered and further marginalized the immigrant and undocumented communities in very devastating ways. So today we want to be able to dive right in to the various issues that are affecting the immigrant community, as well as discuss the holistic approaches in providing legal services from a rebellious lawyering lens as it relates to deportation defense, racial injustice, prolonged detention, homelessness, domestic violence, and so forth. And so we do have some questions for the panelists already, but we welcome all of you to be able to join in the conversation. This is very informal. It's just going to be a dialogue between everyone. And if you have questions, you can either put it in the chat box and we'll be prompted to ask your question. Or you can use the raise your hand feature if it's available. And so the first question really right out of the door is, what is rebellious lawyering? And I think I can point to Professor Bill Hing to see if he can guide us with that question.
Hi, thanks, Monica, for the invitation. Many people may have different views of what rebellious lawyering means to you or means to people that you know who practice social justice lawyering. But the definition that I use is the definition that was that's used by the founder, the person who coined rebellious lawyering, a good friend of mine, Jerry Lopez, who's a law professor at UCLA. And you know, he developed this approach to lawyering over the years. First, when he got out of law school and practiced in Southern California and began writing and teaching. And essentially, to me, it's got several prongs. And it's not what you might think off the top of your head, which is rebelling against the government or rebelling against the bad guys like DHS, or rebelling against corporations. I mean, if you want to use that as your framework, that's fine. But what Jerry has in mind and what I have in mind when it comes to rebellious lawyering is actually rebelling against conventional lawyering. And so the practice of rebellious lawyering that I try to engage in, that I've written about, has to do first with respecting the client and understanding that the client brings a lot of wisdom and experience to the table, and that it's not about a top-down kind of relationship. It's much more of a partnership and a collaboration. Secondly, it has a lot to do with ethnography and getting to know the client community and understanding where people are coming from, because whatever you say or do, even if you think that you're from the same community, once you set foot into a law building, you no longer are that same person from the community. It kind of screws you up. And so you've got to admit that you need to learn about the community from which your clients come from. The other thing has to do with allies, that the kinds of problems that our clients face are not simply what you would label legal problems, that our clients have a range of challenges. That's why, for example, at our immigration clinic at USF, we have a full-time social services coordinator, because we understand that that our clients have much more than just so-called legal problems. And in fact, we need to reach out to allies to solve the problems, whether it be other attorneys or social service workers, but also politicians, fundraisers, funders, people who are organizers. We need all kinds of allies to work on these problems, because we're not going to solve it ourselves as lawyers. And I guess finally, the thing that I would mention is that we have a responsibility to demystify the processes that our clients are going through, that there's just simply no excuse for working with clients without explaining to them and taking the time to explain to them the process and even the legal theories that we're developing, so that they understand what we're doing and why we're doing and what role they may be able to play in the advancement of their case.
Yeah, thank you so much, Professor Hing. I really appreciate you explaining what rebellious lawyering is for you. And I definitely was trained by Professor Hing under this theory of rebellious lawyering. So I'm very proud that. And I definitely think that I can take rebellious lawyering with me, whether I'm a lawyer or not. And so it definitely applies, and it really allows for that collaborative building between fields and agencies. I'd like to ask Aidin a question. And I'm thinking, it's easy to think about clients from a specific kind of legal lens, right? And think of our clients with, from the legal problem that they have, right? And they all have so many things going on. How can advocates approach helping their clients in a more holistic way?
Yeah, thanks, Monica. No, it's such a pleasure to be here. So yeah, I think there are a couple of things, right? And I think that like Bill was really getting to this idea of really approaching from the initial conversation when you decide to take on a client or a community member as a client, understanding and setting those expectations from the beginning. And usually it can really start off even by letting them know, hey, I'm your lawyer and I have very specific skills and expertise that can help address certain aspects of your case, but this is really a partnership. And these are things that that I can see that you can do in this partnership. Talk to me about what your understanding is about the case. And definitely, as Professor Hing mentioned, like not assuming that the legal theory is too complicated to explain it to them. There are ways to take out a lot of like the very technical things, but give them a legal framework. And I think it's really about understanding that your client, I'm an immigration practitioner. And so our clients have overcome a lot of things, right, to get to this country of, just like the actual journey of coming to this country. And so they're very savvy, they're very smart and capable. And a lot of those things are transferable to the advocacy in their own case. And so I think it's, first of all, is understanding that your client knows more than often they're given credit. Just because they might not speak English, that might not be their primary language, it does not mean that they're not smart and capable of doing things. Making sure that you take them with you throughout the process and educate them. But also, because their immigration case is just one aspect of their life, like I think it's also very important to understand kind of all of the issues that they're confronting. So we will often ask our clients, like, what are other things that are going on in your life that you think might make it challenging for you to be in a partnership in this case, or as much as you would want to be? And so having a better understanding about what are the issues that your client is confronting, getting to know them is really important, not just for the purposes of like, how am I going to meet the requirements for some form of relief for them, but trying to understand who they are and what's going on in their life, so that you can better approach any challenges is going to be really important. So those are some of the ways I think that it's really important, as I mentioned at the outset, to start your relationship with your client as a partnership and let them know that that is how you envision the representation to be. And I have found that to be really, really effective.
Great, yeah, thank you so much, Aidin. I think it's important to have these type of conversations at the outset with your clients, and from there you can build on whatever those additional needs arise or are needed with as it pertains to your client. So thank you so much for that. What I like about this panel is that we're all in different fields, and as that collaboration between fields or agencies, so that we can work together to help a very vulnerable community, right? And so I wanted to direct this question to Sabrina, and to ask, we're in a global pandemic. COVID-19 has affected so many folks, especially here in California, and we have this very vulnerable community, right? And so can you dialogue with us about what kind of issues you're seeing at Family Justice Center, and whether there has been a rise in maybe domestic violence in the immigrant community, or any other issues that your organization has noted?
Yes, Monica, and thank you again for having me here. It's such an important conversation. When the Family Justice Center, which is located here in Oakland, during the pandemic, when the shelter in place first took place, we realized that we were not getting calls, we were not getting walk-ins, and we were not seeing from the people that we normally would be helping. And here, as Michael stated in the beginning, we have many different partners on site, including police officers who are the domestic violence unit. And so when I would speak with them and I would say, hey, what are you guys seeing? Are you seeing, rising cases? And they said the same thing. We're just not hearing from anyone. No 911 calls. We had a 40% drop in requests for U visas during this time. And so what I had to realize is that people are not calling 911. They're not seeking out the help, but where are they going? People during the pandemic would still go to a hospital. They will still go to a clinic. They will still get essential needs. And so once I spoke with my partners who are in those fields, they were seeing the high numbers. Their ER departments were filled with victims of domestic violence and child abuse. And what was different is that they were seeing more severe cases of violence, more severe situations of injury. And so what that taught us is that we have to go outside our normal outreach and meet people where they are. And so what we did is we knew that people were going to be going to food banks. They were going to be going to where they had lunch drop-offs at the school districts. So we created a bilingual flyer, and it was about the size of a brochure. And on that information, we gave all the phone numbers for people who were experiencing violence to get help, because they may not have been ready to call the police. And that's, one of the things that Bill said in the beginning is so important, is that we have to meet people where they are. And we have to accept that maybe they're not ready for law enforcement. And especially right now in this climate, a lot of people of color are not wanting to call law enforcement, but they still need help. And so by giving them those different options, you're letting them know that we're still here for you.
Yeah, that's great. I think that you mentioned so many important things. We're looking at racial injustice. We're looking at bilingual services, whether as it pertains to either legal services or as it pertains to any type of other social service, food banks, and so that brings me to my next question, which is the importance of grassroots movements and organizations, people that are on the ground serving the immigrant communities. And so my question is for you, Sylvie, what type of work are you doing on the ground with immigrant communities in the Bay Area? And tell me what is the importance of grassroots movements, especially when you're dealing with a very vulnerable population?
Yeah, thank you. Let me make sure I'm not muted. So Kalma as an organizing team has been working together for about 2 years. We were the Bay Area chapter of Border Angels, which is a immigrant services org that's based in San Diego, for 1.5 years. And then in April, like at the start of COVID, we launched Kalma. And our programming has been entirely geared towards basically responding to the crisis, doing a lot of the work that we were doing, but in a very focused manner. So a bit of background on our programming. We have a community engagement team that works with 27 families. Since our launch in April, we've been covering rent for about 10 families, rent and financial stipends. We also provide in-kind donations for everything from clothing to furniture to whatever the need might be. We partner with other local organizations, one of which is Mission Meals. It's based in San Francisco, to do weekly grocery deliveries for 27 families in our program. And Mission Meals is an organization that serves over 300, if I'm not mistaken, families. And we also do a monthly day labor outreach program. So we have a team that meets with day laborers in Oakland and hands out bags with essential items, food, hot meals, and that sort of thing. And I think that, all of our programs have been geared, at least thus far, and we're very, very green. We're still really developing what we do and figuring out what longevity looks like for us. But all of our programs have been geared towards kind of like lightening the load a bit, understanding the circumstances that many of our, the members of our community are facing, what we kind of recognize is that if we can provide directed, comprehensive care, much of which relieves financial burden, then it puts people in a better position to face the other, the circumstances that they're under given COVID. And I think, there's numerous, and I could name numerous organizations like ours that have sprouted just in the last 6 months in response and in, recognizing that there's a huge lack of aid, whether it's provided by local government or just, obstacles that people face trying to work through the system. And it's really been down to community-based organizations like Calma and like so many others that are responding, I think, really effectively to these issues.
Yeah, thank you so much. I agree. Definitely response, grassroots movements, and being able to build your own platforms and not having to wait. I think that's important in our immigrant communities. We do have a question, more of a, I think it's a clarifying question in the chat. So I'm just going to read it out, and whoever wants to maybe clarify or elaborate. It says, rebellious lawyering in immigrant communities gives the impression that the lawyer is setting themselves against an authority. However, if I'm following correctly, it sounds like it's being characterized as a holistic approach, somewhat closer to a partnership than the general approach done by lawyers towards their client's case. Is this correct?
Well, I'll take, yeah, I think that the commenter has it right. Let me give this example, that I think that a more conventional lawyer would meet with a client who's probably very knowledgeable. Let's assume it's a very knowledgeable attorney who meets with the client and takes the facts. That more conventional lawyer might then say to the client, listen, this is what I think the problem is, and this is what I think I can do for you. It sounds fine, but the approach that I would take is I would gather all the information, et cetera, at least over a period of time, maybe more than one interview, obviously. And what I would say is, here's what I'm thinking, and I want to know what you think about what I think. And then at some point say, here's what I think we can do together on this case. And let me know if you think there are other people that we should be reaching out to that may be able to help address the various problems that we've outlined. And this would happen over a series of meetings, not just in the first interview.
Yeah, definitely. That makes sense to me. And I think the approach is really just working in tandem with your client and building that collaboration with them as a knowledgeable partner, and not as someone who thinks that everything as the lawyer, you're going to tell your client what to do, because that's definitely not the approach that we want to. We want to kind of move away from that traditional lawyering mindset. And Professor Hing, just a follow-up question. Immigrants and undocumented people are working on the front lines right now without any medical, legal, or political protection. What is something that we need to critically understand about this statement that I just mentioned?
This situation just underscores the awful procedures and rules and policies that the Trump administration has laid on the non-citizen communities, not just those that are here, but those that are at the border, obviously. And I think that what it means is that it's time for everyone to step up, that we actually need massive collaboration in recognition of the critical role that immigrants are playing as essential workers, the critical role that immigrants are playing in the political debate over who should be the next president, and that we should do whatever we can to give voice and to give attention to the clients that we work with, because if we allow this to happen without standing up for the essential workers and our clients, then we're not doing our job. I think that our job is actually, as lawyers, since we have day-to-day contact, is to facilitate their voices.
That's definitely so important. And I think, you know, if we could have more of that, what you just said, Professor Hing, we'd be in a really good place. And I think most of us are on the ground, and, you know, practitioners, organizers, advocates, you know, we definitely have that in our minds and in our hearts. So we're hoping that, you know, we can continue to do this important work. Aidin, can you give us a little bit of insight into some of the issues that are affecting your clients right now during COVID, or at least have been exacerbated by COVID, and just so that we can all kind of think about different issues that are affecting the, immigrants in our communities?
Yeah, so there are a lot of things that have come up. We at Centro, we represent low-income immigrants. And so as we know, and all of the data has shown, the people who have been primarily impacted by COVID are people who are people of color, brown and Black people, low-income people, both because of the disproportionate number of people who have actually you know, fallen ill to COVID, but also other issues that have resulted from COVID, unemployment, housing issues. So all of those things have come up for our client. One thing we've seen is that while their immigration case continues to be really important to them, it isn't always the primary thing or the only thing they're having to consider. Many of them are having to consider, you know, housing, the lack, especially in the Bay Area, the lack of stable housing, being able to keep their jobs. Many of our clients were laid off, at least temporarily. Others have lost jobs entirely. And that has had real effects on our ability to represent them. Even being able to communicate with them, we've had a number of clients that we've had a hard time being able to get in touch with them. And we've later learned they actually lost their housing. And so, you know, where the cell phone number that we had was no longer working because they couldn't afford to pay it, or the home where we were sending all their mail to kept getting sent back because they lost housing. For their children, a lot of the people that we represent are the primary breadwinners. And so they've, you know, had to also figure out, do they send their kids back to school? In the Bay Area, fortunately, there are a lot of resources, and it's been made more accessible through technology. But for some of our clients that we represent, there's also a real gap in technology. Like we represent a lot of Indigenous speaking community members, and there's an added layer of complexity, like not enough outreach to people in their own language. And so we've had to find ways to be able to give them information where other organizations maybe aren't able to reach them, and we are. We're really fortunate that we have a full-time Mom Mayan interpreter on staff, and she has been able to help us field questions and provide videos that she's recorded with information for the community. And we also partner with a number of other organizations. And we're also really fortunate that we're an organization that's a multi-issue organization. So we also offer representation in the areas of housing and employment. And that also, we've seen a lot more need to be able to help triage questions for clients who don't know how to access unemployment or disability. So there are a number of issues that now are coming up for our clients that, you know, take precedent over their immigration case. And so that really, I think, has highlighted for us that our clients are having to deal with a lot of things beyond their immigration case, and we have to understand them and help them work through those issues. And so for us, it's also been a good learning experience to be able to know how to better respond to our clients' needs and understand that immigration is not always going to be the top thing on their mind. And so we've had to ourselves figure out how to access resources and be able to give those to our community.
Yeah, thank you, Aidin. I think that's great. You know, being able to have, you know, Norma as part of our team, and to be able to help us with the Indigenous communities has been integral. to the services and that we provide at Centro. And so speaking of language, we do have a question for Sabrina from Ana Daza, and she is asking regarding navigating domestic violence disclosures for clients as an immigrants' rights advocate. I don't have deep experience with social work, but as you mentioned previously, we've had high need for our clients during the pandemic to support them in situations of domestic violence and abuse in their homes. As immigration advocates, how can we navigate these situations with our clients so that we can best support them without potentially doing an injustice towards their situation or ourselves, considering we don't have the experience that you all have at Alameda Family Justice Center? And additionally, how can we navigate referrals to you, in particular for mom speakers and other folks that speak indigenous languages here in the Bay Area?
Okay, so I'll start with the last part in terms of referrals. So we remained open and have been open during the entire shelter in place. We closed for a couple of days for deep cleaning, but besides that, we're here 8 to 5, Monday through Friday, for calls and for walk-ins. And so definitely, and we serve the entire Alameda County. And so definitely, make that referral in terms of having a person contact us. We have, most of our staff here are bilingual, and many of them are native speakers. And in other languages besides Spanish, we also have Hindi, Punjabi. And when we have a situation where someone is we don't have that language, like you mentioned, mom, we partner with so many different organizations, just like Aidin said, that it really enables us to get someone who does speak that language, because it makes a difference to when someone is going through such a difficult crisis in their lives, to have someone that they can feel comfortable with in talking things through. But I also wanted to highlight the importance of our different organizations who can benefit from partnering with community-based organizations. So what I've learned over this last 6-7 months is that there are many hospitals, there are many government agencies, county agencies that who of course were not prepared for the pandemic and the level of how it hit, but they were really not prepared for dealing with communities who are marginalized. And so when people needed information, it was not available in multiple languages. When they needed to speak with a person, there was not someone who can give them that. And in speaking with some of my partners, just in bringing up the mom community, one of my partners at Highland Hospital shared with me that she was just seeing entire families, 7-8 people, their neighbors, everybody was testing positive for COVID, and she couldn't understand it. And it wasn't until she started talking to advocates from those communities that she realized that, one, they live in close environments, proximity to each other, and also based on a lot of their culture and religion that many of them practice, they go door to door. And so they were still doing that even within the shelter in place. And so I think that it's, that's just one example of how we as professionals, it's incumbent upon us for us to become aware of the communities that we serve, so that next patient that comes in or next client that comes in, that professional is better prepared. And it's not kind of a reactive, but more proactive.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that's all part of rebellious lawyering, right? Understanding the community that you serve, working in tandem with the community that you're serving, and as you go into these communities. So I think that's a very important point. And there's a couple other questions that I'm going to ask. One is, are there organizations still taking volunteers? And anyone can answer that one. And then the other question is are there any updates of the impact of COVID-19 on public interest lawyers working on the Mexican side of the border and asylum seekers forced to wait in Mexico MPP?
I can maybe respond to a bit of that. As far as organizations still taking volunteers, I'm not sure specifically what looks like translation services. I think what Professor Hing said about massive collaboration being the priority at this moment, I would say absolutely. And I would say whether it's supporting via donation or in-kind donation, or you have a set of skills that you can lend to the work that an organization is doing, yes, is the answer to that. Absolutely. And I think being really vocal, you know, about what you're getting involved with, and making sure that the community that you're surrounded with is also aware. And you know, that's a really big, important piece. It's one of our pillars at Calma, is the education piece, especially being in the Bay Area and being so far from the border, making sure that we still recognize what's happening at the border moves into the entire state and impacts, you know, communities across the country, really. And what I can say about updates about, you know, the MPP Migrant Protection Protocol. So we have organizational partners that work at the border. Border Kindness and Border Angels are two of those partners who do really incredible work on the Mexico side in Tijuana and in Mexicali. And I would encourage everybody to look into those two organizations and the work that they're doing. But my understanding is that at the moment, court cases are really just on pause for many people, I think. And what was already a really dire situation of essentially being stranded in Mexico, unable to come in and find at least some semblance of stability within the United States, is now the same circumstances, but extended for an, you know, indeterminate amount of time. And then just to add to that, while we're on that topic, Calma is one group that works to provide aid to those organizations when there's a window or opportunity. Pre-COVID, we were doing a lot of caravans, participating in their programs and supporting these caravans that they do of both aid and donations down to the border. And now, just with, you know, border closures or at least delays in crossing the border, access to that sort of like humanitarian aid has really, really slowed. It's become circumstances where either, you know, expenses are rising and they're having to purchase in Mexico versus, you know, a cheaper option of purchasing supplies and items in the United States. Or it's, you know, takes days to get, you know, bulk items across the border versus what would have been otherwise a couple hours. So that's kind of just a snippet of something that I think is really important that people are aware of, that there's thousands of people on the Mexico side going through or waiting for asylum proceedings that are in, you know, really dire situations.
Yeah. Let me add to the volunteer thing, Monica. So Monica knows that in February 2019, Monica went with us to volunteer at Al Otro Lado in Tijuana. And then in March of this year, the immigration clinic went to volunteer right before shelter in place at Kino Border Initiative in Nogales. And but because of the COVID closure in March under Title 42, the excuse used to close a border to the migrants and the implementation of other rules by the Trump administration, we actually filed a complaint with the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights. And last Friday, we actually had a hearing before the Inter-American Commission complaining about the COVID closure, MPP, and the ACAs, the Asylum Cooperative Agreements. And that hearing went well. So we're expecting a condemnation of the United States and Mexico from the Inter-American Commission of what's transpiring at the border. But Al Otro Lado is asking for volunteers. In fact, we have, you know, I have a dozen students that are volunteering with Al Otro Lado right now. And the way it works is you go to the Al Otro Lado website and you sign up as a volunteer. They're looking for students and attorneys, even those without experience. Those with experience, they will have you do supervision of what's happening is they're doing this all at a distance, but they train everybody on how to do the work at a distance. And so these dozen students they've all got time slots where they interview people, and it's all arranged. It's people that, as Sylvie said, are waiting on the other side of the border. And it's very difficult to do the interview, but because it takes very long, but that is done. And if you don't have experience, you're just doing screenings. If you have experience, you actually are helping people with their declarations or their I-589s. And if you have a lot of experience, then you're actually helping people to prepare for their hearings once, if and when they allow people to come back across. And so that's actually happening there. And so if you sign up as a volunteer, you'll get notification of their next training session. They just finished a set of trainings in the end of September. They probably won't do another set of trainings until November, but it is, and even if you don't speak Spanish, you can still volunteer because they have a group of volunteer interpreters that will help folks that don't speak Spanish.
Definitely. If folks have questions about Al Otro Lado or any other of the organizations that we have on this panel today, we can certainly put that information in the chat box for everyone so that they can take a look at each organization and see, you know, where your skills would fit in, or if you would like to maybe even go down to the border and help out with Al Otro Lado. So, you know, Aidin did mention, you know, homelessness and joblessness and evictions, and I wanted to ask Professor Hing, these type of situations, homelessness, joblessness, evictions, are putting immigrants in precarious and more visible situations. As such, the visibility has kind of catapulted them into these dangerous spaces where, you know, ICE or far-right group movements are kind of targeting them. So what are your thoughts? And what can we expect to see leading into this election with, you know, a combination of COVID and then, you know, the political field, the state that we're in right now?
Yeah, I mean, we've already seen it, and I know, you know, Aidin and you and Sylvie probably have seen it already. The ICE is trying to make an example of so-called sanctuary jurisdictions. There have been some arrests locally and in other parts of the country, and it goes back to, you know your rights presentations, which are very difficult to do right now, but we're reaching out to try to do know your rights presentations. It's putting pressure on local law enforcement to not cooperate with ICE, because ICE is reaching out. To be honest with you, especially in the Central Valley, they're reaching out to law enforcement partners because the Central Valley sheriffs are less inclined to follow the state sanctuary ordinance than Alameda or Santa Clara or San Francisco. But even in San Francisco, I worry sometimes about the San Francisco police because there are some members, and I'll just say it outright, there are some members of the San Francisco Police Department that don't like the sanctuary ordinance, and I've worked against them. And we've got to put political pressure on our leaders to make sure that the sanctuary policies are defended very strongly, and because ICE is trying to make an example of us.
Right, I agree. And I think along those lines, we've heard about expedited removal, and I wondered if maybe Aidin can jump in and give us some insight. You know, what can folks expect about this new recent expedited removal news? Not only as advocates, what can we do to help our community, but also for immigrants themselves, what should they be looking for, or how should they prepare?
Yeah, that's a good question, Monica. So this is as of about a week ago. There was an update to a policy change that the Trump administration had announced shortly after he took office, essentially a series of memos that announced some really big changes to immigration policy, and one of which was the expansion of the expedited removal process, which is not new in law. Expedited removal has always, since 1996, has permitted low-level immigration officials to essentially deport people without all of the things that we know as due process protections, without the opportunity to go before an immigration judge. But prior to this, it had always been applied primarily within 100 miles of the US border, and for people who could not show that they'd been in the US for more than 2 weeks, and who had entered the country without a visa, for example, without being admitted to the country. But now, under the Trump administration, he's proposed expanding this to essentially being able to put anybody into these expedited removal proceedings who is in the country without permission, who entered without inspection or admission, so like a visa, for example, and who cannot prove that they have been in the US for more than 2 years. So as I mentioned, this isn't new, but they've recently announced that they've given a deadline to all of their immigration officers to undergo this mandatory training by this Friday, October 16th, after which any immigration official who has undergone the training has the authority to start carrying out this policy. And so we haven't yet heard of this happening, certainly not in the Bay Area. But potentially this could have really big consequences in the community. Many more people could be removed from the country without having the opportunity to see an immigration judge. So we've been trying to monitor this as best as we can. One of the things we always have to think about when there is any type of new announcement by the administration is we have to consider that that this could really set fear in the community. So we always want to make sure that when we do give information to the community, we're understanding that we want to give accurate information and give people plans and options so that they're not alarmed for no reason. And there may be some people for whom this doesn't apply at all. For example, citizens or people who are green card holders, they're not subject to expedited removal proceedings. So that's really important to clarify. This wouldn't affect everybody. But some important things to consider are, some things that people might want to start carrying around with them. There's a list of documents that people can carry with them if they're living in the country without lawful immigration status. They could carry things if they have any type of immigration petition that's been filed for them. They can carry a copy of the receipt that has been filed, preferably carrying any type of document that does not give information about their country of origin. So ideally, they wouldn't show anything like a passport from a foreign country or an ID from a foreign country, because even if you're not a citizen of the US, it is immigration's burden to demonstrate that you are not a citizen and that you're subject to being removed from the United States. So we never want to give them information and kind of do that job for them. People could carry things like a student ID if it shows that they've been a student here for more than 2 years, utility bills that shows their address, and that they've been in the country for more than 2 years. There's a really good toolkit available at ilrc.org that explains what this new policy is and how people can prepare a plan to respond to this, and it gives a list of documents that people can compile and carry with them. But I think the most important thing to highlight right now is that this is still pretty early. We don't yet have enough information to know how exactly it's going to be carried out. But what's going to be key, again, is giving information to the community. So something that we're going to be doing at Centro Legal is modifying our Know Your Rights presentations, which we are still doing virtually. So through like Facebook Live and TikTok, we're sharing information. A number of other organizations are also preparing information. And then there are a number of rapid response networks that are set up across the state of California that were established specifically to be able to respond to any ICE activity. And there is a specific rapid response network in San Francisco. There's one for Alameda County, a CLIP, the Alameda County Immigrant Legal Education Partnership. And so if you just Google that, you'll get our phone number. And there are a number of organizations. Centro Legal is the legal organization that responds if there is any ICE activity, and we provide representation to anybody who does come into contact by immigration authorities. But of course, the tricky part of expedited removal proceedings is that they're expedited. So things happen very, very quickly, and you have essentially only a couple of hours to respond or intervene. I will note that something that's very important for people to know is that immigration officials are not allowed to remove individuals if they have a fear of being returned to their country of origin. So if somebody does have a fear of being returned to their country of origin, they should affirmatively say that to an immigration official, by which that should trigger for the immigration official to then refer them to an asylum officer to be interviewed about their fear of return, and then potentially being able to pursue an asylum claim in the United States. So lots of information, but what I would say is anybody who has questions about this should speak to an immigration attorney and get an individualized consultation. And they can call our organization or a number of organizations in the Bay Area to learn specifically how this may or may not apply to you.
Thank you so much, Aidin. Before we start wrapping up, I did have one more question that I wanted to ask Sabrina. We talked about just the immigrant community as a whole, but I wanted to touch on children and whether, if you have any information as to whether immigrant children are there higher rates of any kind of abuse that's been going on, or sometimes we've heard that some children look forward to going to school so that they can at least eat at some points. Do you have any advice for us, or what are you seeing in your organization or in your community, and as advocates, what can we look out for as it relates to children?
Well, that's very important, Monica. And here is that when panelists have touched on this.
Sorry, I think you might be cutting out a bit.
Uh-oh. Hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, so I was saying other panelists touched on that, is that even though we as professionals may be primarily life, not hearing me?
It's cutting out a bit, but I think that we could Can y'all hear her, or is it just me?
Sabrina, it was like it was almost like the mic just fell away from you and then came back to you. Would you mind calling in?
I'll call in.
Okay. Then we can, while we wait for Sabrina, because I do think that this is a really important question. I wanted to just start to wrap up, and we are getting to the end of our panel today, but I wanted to get your thoughts on one last question, and so we can start just, thinking about it. And my first question is, how are you using the rebellious lawyering model in your own work, and what are you most proud of at the end of the day when you go home and you get to relax with your family and you're sitting back and you're relaxing? What are you most proud of when it comes to being on the ground and being out here doing this work?
Let me start. I'm honestly, I'm not proud of anything. Practicing immigration law is very, very difficult right now. And, I just lost a case yesterday at the BIA, and so I'm not proud of that. But what I do, the clinic has actually taken up 5 detained cases for people before the BIA. And they're people that we've never met before, and they're all detained. And so I've done my best to reach out to those people in detention to try to explain to them what's happening and what's happening at the BIA. And, it's not pretty, but that's how I'm trying to be true to what I say, which is trying to keep those clients in detention. Even, we had a conversation with somebody from Ethiopia the other day and had to pay for an interpreter because nobody, we needed one. And so I'm not proud of the work. I'm happy to do the work, but it's very difficult work right now.
I can maybe add on. I think that when you think about how you're using it, it's funny, you know, we're new and a lot of our team are not necessarily new to organizing, but we're responding to something that we never imagined we would ever have to respond to. And I think that working with this philosophy, we never had a name for rebellious lawyering, rebellious, you know, community work, but we work with the philosophy of that we are responsible to one another in community, and that, you know, that we don't provide charity, we provide solidarity, that we're working in community against injustice together. As far as, I don't think there's something that I personally feel proud of. I think, you know, I'm a member of a huge team.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be such a downer, so you should be proud of the work that you're doing.
I think, but, you know, I think the point being that, you know, we're a part of a really big collective of other organizations that are doing incredible work. So I feel very hopeful. And, you know, we have, you know, experiences within our own community of folks who, through community donations, we were able to begin providing funds that helped move families from shelters during COVID-19 into their own homes. You know, so those are the small stories that I think we have to celebrate. And, you know, each member of our team works so closely and so passionately, and is so connected to so many other organizations. And I wish I had time to list them all out. I might, in the chat before we end, just list a couple local orgs beyond Calma that are doing this incredible work. So I feel really hopeful, and I feel really proud to be part of a community that's so invested in this work.
Awesome, thank you.
Yes, I was thinking that, Bill, like if you're not proud of something, gosh, I don't know that any, the rest of us would feel comfortable.
I'm just pissed off that I lost a case yesterday, sorry.
No, and Bill's totally right. It's really, really hard to be an immigration practitioner right now. But for me, like the way that we're doing rebellious lawyering at Centro, I try to incorporate it in my own lawyering with my own clients and the way I partner with them. But something that we're trying to do is change our immigration practice. We have been a very high volume practice for several years now. And what I have found is that it can be really valuable in and of itself. You serve a large number of people, and there's a lot of value and benefit in that. But what's really challenging is to be able to do community lawyering when you represent so many people, because that takes time, right? You need to be able to listen to your clients. You need it to be able to be patient, to build partnerships with other organizations. And so if you have so many cases that you're handling, you just don't have enough hours in the day to be able to do all of that. So something that we are intentionally doing now at our organization is we're trying to, you know, you have to like give and take, can't have all of it at the same time. We're scaling down the number of people we represent, but are moving towards really building in a rebellious lawyering style to our practice. And already I see it with a lot of our team members. I feel really proud of everybody that I work with. COVID has presented like many challenges, not just to our clients, but certainly to us as practitioners. And everybody on our team has been incredibly creative about how to respond to issues of like, just how do we stay in touch with our clients? How do we help bridge the technology gap with them? To our detention team, that during kind of what Bill was alluding to, during COVID, but under this administration as a whole, we are losing much more, and not because we're not doing our job, but because this administration is trying to find every single way to undermine and do things unlawfully and things that are in violation of longstanding precedent. And so we're losing cases, and we're having to find ways to lawyer differently. And one of the things that has happened as a result of COVID is, for example, the folks on our detention team have found really creative ways to uplift the voices of people that are in detention by listening to what their demands are and sharing those with media outlets, with the governor's office. So not just sharing what we think the strategy should be, but really also listening to the folks that are being directly impacted and thinking of ways of how we can partner with them and elevate their voices. And for me, it's a privilege to be able to give the lawyers on our team a space where they can be creative and think about other ways that we can approach things, especially because traditional ways of lawyering are just not working under this administration. And so I by no means am the holder of how to do things, but I'm very excited to see how everybody on our team, our advocates and our attorneys, are every day being very resilient and trying to find ways to partner with our clients and push back. So that includes you, Monica, of course.
Thank you all. I think Sabrina, are you on the line?
Hi, Monica. Yes, I'm called in.
Yes, we can hear you perfectly, loud and clear.
So I just wanted to touch on a couple of the things the panelists said, in that, COVID has been difficult for all of us as professionals in our personal lives. But I want everyone to just imagine, if you're on top of dealing with everything with COVID, the job insecurity, think about the people who are battling domestic violence in their homes, and that the person that they're sheltered in place with is their abuser, and that their children are witnesses to that. And so it's an exponential effect of abuse. And so when I'm doing my work, that's what keeps me focused on why I'm here and why I keep partnering with new organizations, and why I am a firm believer in the wraparound model as the only successful model that's going to really alleviate people's everyday issues. During COVID, we saw that people had food insecurity, housing insecurity, transportation. People, just think about it, people were using bus and BART to get groceries, and those were, a lot of their routes were cut entirely. And so I feel it's our responsibility as professionals who do direct service work to think outside the box, just like the other panelists said. And so we've partnered with Lyft to make sure that people can still get their essential needs and get to the hospital visits, and that their kids can get what they need. We got donations for Chromebooks to help close that digital divide. But on top of that, then not everybody has data. So it's like we're constantly like, okay, what is the next step? And I just feel, so I want everybody watching and listening in to feel so empowered about the fact that work is being done. And if we have not resolved one issue, we're going to collaborate to figure out, okay, how do we fix that gap that we're seeing?
Yes, thank you so much, Sabrina, for chiming in and for being able to call back. I think it really is all about all the moving parts, not only with the advocates on the ground and the practitioners, but also the client, and always remembering what a client is going through and how much it's probably double or triple harder than what they're already going through, like a person like you or me is going through. So I think one of the words that is in the chat box, one of the participants said is resilience is the key. So the secret for the motivation and the work. And so I think that's very much true. I think the way that things are moving is being able to work together with other organizations so that we can best help clients or immigrants in the community, whether that be through food banks, language services, working with counselors or social workers at a school, or therapy services, professors, clinics, lawyers. I think that's going to be the future of rebellious lawyering. And I think that here in the Bay Area, we are able to put that into play, even if we don't normally hear the word rebellious lawyering, but that's really what we're all doing and what it looks like on the ground for all of us. So I appreciate everybody's time, everybody's dialogue, everybody's thoughts and opinions, and I invite everyone to apply Rebellious Lawyering. I know Professor Hing has written a couple of articles on that, and Jerry Lopez, of course, and there's a lot of other practitioners that use this theory. So definitely read some articles, visit the Rebellious Lawyering website, and also visit each one of our participating panelists organizations. Calma, we have Alameda County Family Justice Center, we have Centro Legal de la Raza, we also have USF School of Law Immigration Clinic, Immigration and Deportation Defense Clinic. So I invite you all to take a look at each one of our organizations, ask about volunteerships. If not, you can always look at Al Otro Lado as well. And we invite you all to just be rebellious in whatever capacity that you can. You know, sometimes it's hard to look outside of ourselves, but there are people out in our communities who really need us, who really need our voice. And so, you know, I think that together we can all do the work that's very important. So I appreciate everyone's time, and a special thank you to GGU Presents for allowing this, creating this space, a safe space for all of us to dialogue and to, you know, collaborate with one another and to, you know, present some of our ideas. So thank you so much. I'll hang around if anybody has any questions. Otherwise, I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Monica. That was a wonderful show.
Thank you, everybody.